Kevin Stefanski's decision to assign SHEDEUR Sanders to the scout team wasn't just questionable, it was defining. The scout team is where quarterbacks simulate opponents, not build chemistry with their own offense. It's not where starters are made. It's where futures are stalled. For a rookie quarterback, especially one with Sanders' upside, it's a move that effectively freezes growth. Stefanski denied him first-team reps, denied him rhythm, and by extension, denied him the ability to even fail on his own terms. If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed. All of this was happening quietly until the commissioner of the NFL called it what it was: sabotage in slow motion. Goodell didn't leave it at implication. He named names and attached consequences, something unheard of from a league executive of his rank. In spotlighting Stefanski's decisions, Goodell put every coach on notice. Merit, not optics, must determine who gets developed. That message wasn't subtle. It was a warning. Either the league enforces fairness in its development systems, or it risks turning a blind eye to a rigged pipeline. Sanders' case now stands as a litmus test for whether the NFL actually values equity or just markets it. It's one thing to be overlooked. It's another to be strategically erased. That's exactly what's been happening to SHEDEUR Sanders, a rookie quarterback who showed up ready to work, ready to compete, and ready to prove himself on the field. But before he could even take a meaningful step, the system decided to take several steps ahead of him, and not in his favor. SHEDEUR was drafted into a league that's long claimed to reward talent. But the moment he arrived, the welcome mat was pulled out from under him. Instead of being given first-team reps like other top rookie quarterbacks, he was buried on a scout team. That's not just a developmental delay. That's a strategic blockade. The scout team is where you simulate opponents' plays for the defense. It's not where you build chemistry with your own receivers. It's not where you learn the actual playbook that you need to run on Sundays. And this wasn't a temporary arrangement or a rotational strategy. This was consistent exclusion, the kind that keeps a player on the outside of team progress, while giving others a runway to grow, to fail, and to improve. Kevin Stefanski, head coach of the Cleveland Browns, was the one pulling the strings. According to reports, he actively chose to keep SHEDEUR off the main rotation. He made sure Sanders didn't get the same opportunities as others to develop within the offense. No meaningful reps, no structured investment. And the worst part? No clear reason why. But what really pushed us from bad coaching into systemic rot was what followed: a wave of media attacks that felt less like critique and more like a smear campaign. Journalists Tony Grossi, Mary Kay Kitt, and Jason Lloyd led the charge, not by breaking down SHEDEUR's mechanics or reading his practice tape, but by fixating on things that had nothing to do with football. They mocked minor injuries. They exaggerated insignificant legal infractions like traffic tickets and twisted them into a character issue. When coverage becomes more about parking violations and past progressions, something's off. When journalists are spending more time framing a player as immature than analyzing his potential, that's not journalism. That's agenda. The result was predictable and devastating. A manufactured public perception of SHEDEUR as unprepared, undisciplined, and unfit for the league. Never mind that he was never actually allowed to compete. Never mind that there was no meaningful data to support the claims. The narrative was already written and facts weren't invited. This wasn't just one bad coaching decision or one out-of-pocket article. This was a coordinated campaign, both internally and externally, to shape how SHEDEUR Sanders would be seen before he ever got a chance to show who he really is. And that's why Roger Goodell's response landed like a bomb. The NFL commissioner, who's famously silent on internal team matters, broke precedent in a way we've rarely seen. He didn't hedge his language. He didn't pass the buck. He went straight for the issue and called it what it was: biased coaching practices and irresponsible media coverage that crossed the line from analysis into targeted defamation. Goodell publicly rebuked the Brown staff and named the journalists involved. He didn't just ask questions. He threatened consequences, including the potential removal of Kevin Stefanski. That kind of move isn't symbolic. It's structural. And it sends a message across the entire league. if you're participating in the systematic suppression of talent, especially when it intersects with racial bias, you're now on notice. The NFL has long struggled with how it evaluates and supports black quarterbacks. The coded language has evolved, but the stereotypes remain. Not a pocket passer. Doesn't fit the system. Lacks leadership. These phrases are still thrown around with reckless ease, and almost always when the subject is a black QB. SHEDEUR is just the latest in a long list of quarterbacks forced to carry that weight before they're even given a proper evaluation. And this time, the machinery got exposed mid-spin by denying him development opportunities and then allowing a toxic media cycle to flourish unchecked. The Browns and the local press created a false reality. A player who's never gotten a fair trial was being publicly convicted for a case that was never opened. And yet, despite all of that, despite the lack of support, the personal attacks, and the structural indifference, SHEDEUR supporters haven't wavered. Fans across the league have seen what's going on. They've watched the tape. They've read between the lines. They've started doing what the media refused to do, investigate the actual football. And what they've found is that SHEDEUR has the tools, the timing, the pocket presence, the mental sharpness, all the things that should have been evaluated in a fair setting but weren't. This disconnect between what fans are seeing and what the media is selling isn't just frustrating, it's dangerous. Because when those in power construct a false story, they control who gets to stay and who gets pushed out. They control who's celebrated and who's labeled a bust. But that control is slipping. Fans aren't buying it anymore. They're smarter, more informed. They're not just listening, they're fact-checking. And now that the commissioner himself has stepped in, the conversation can't be brushed aside as overreaction or Twitter noise. This is official. This is real. And this is serious. What happens next will say everything about where the league is going. Because this isn't just about SHEDEUR anymore. It's about whether the NFL is finally ready to address how race and perception still dictate opportunity in the most high-stakes position in sports. If Stefanski keeps his job without facing consequences, it tells every other coach that bias still comes without penalty. If the journalists who twisted the story walk away unscathed, it sends a message that sensationalism still trumps truth. If the league doesn't implement real changes, transparent oversight, equitable practice allocation, media accountability, then this was just another crisis temporarily managed until the heat dies down. But if they do act, if real changes follow this intervention, then SHEDEUR Sanders' story could become the tipping point for a league that's overdue for a reckoning. It could be the start of a new standard, one where potential is nurtured, not smothered, one where criticism stays rooted in play, not personality, one where no quarterback is boxed out because someone decided they didn't fit the mold. This is the moment for the NFL to choose between performance and perception, between the illusion of equality and the real work of institutional accountability. And fans have a role in that too. The reason this moment hasn't been buried yet is because people kept talking, kept questioning, kept challenging the spin. If you've been following this story, if you've seen through the noise, if you've stood by players who deserve a fair shot, don't stop now. Share what you know. Correct the narrative. Hold the decision makers to the standard they keep claiming to uphold. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Hit like if you're tired of the double standards. Share this with someone who still thinks development decisions happen in a vacuum. And subscribe, because the work of holding people accountable doesn't stop at the press release. This league doesn't change because it wants to. It changes when it has to. And this might be one of those moments. Let's not get it twisted. This wasn't just a miscommunication. This was a coordinated erasure. And if you think it stops with SHEDEUR Sanders, you're not paying attention. Because what happened to SHEDEUR has happened before. It's happened quietly, repeatedly, to dozens of black quarterbacks who entered the league with talent and expectations, only to be sidelined, reframed, and ultimately discarded under the weight of narratives that had nothing to do with football. The only difference this time, it was all caught in real time. Everyone saw it. They saw a head coach, Kevin Stefanski, take a rookie with proven potential and bury him on the scout team. Not for a week, not to let him observe, but as a default. That decision effectively sealed SHEDEUR's fate before the season even started. You can't develop without reps. You can't build chemistry with your offense from the sideline. You can't learn the playbook by simulating someone else's. And while Stefanski was boxing SHEDEUR out from within, the media was finishing the job on the outside. Tony Grossi, Mary Kay Kitt, Jason Lloyd. They stopped reporting and started character building. Only the character they were building wasn't real. It was a caricature, entitled Immature Careless. Based on what? Not his game film, not his conduct in the locker room, but traffic tickets, minor injuries, speculative nonsense dressed up as journalism. That's not sports coverage. That's a hit job, and that's why Goodell's response mattered. Because for once, someone at the top didn't pretend it was just another team decision. He acknowledged a deeper truth, that this was a structural failure, that it wasn't just about reps, it was about access, that it wasn't just harsh media. It was media weaponized against a player before he'd even been tested. This wasn't your usual commissioner PR cleanup. Goodell didn't just throw out generic phrases about learning moments or moving forward. He went directly after the decision makers. He acknowledged the league's own complicity in failing to protect players from systemic bias. He signaled that equity wasn't going to be a suggestion anymore. It would be a requirement. And when he said Stefanski could be removed, that was the loudest message of all. Not just to the Browns, but to every coach across the NFL. You're no longer immune. If you deny development access to a player, especially when the patterns of that denial mirror racial bias, your job is on the line. That's new and long overdue, because the NFL has spent decades pretending it can't see the problem, acting like fit and system and leadership are objective criteria, when in reality, they've been used to excuse exclusion. They've become the language of coded gatekeeping. When a black quarterback doesn't fit the system rarely changes. But when it's a white quarterback, the system magically becomes adaptable. When a black QB is raw, it's used as an indictment. When a white QB is raw, it's used as a reason to invest long-term. The truth is, the same traits get judged differently based on who's displaying them. And SHEDEUR's case pulled back the curtain on all of it. He didn't have a meltdown. He didn't lash out. He didn't spiral. He stayed focused, even while the walls were closing in, even while the narrative was being rewritten in real time. He handled it the way the league says it wants young players to handle adversity. But that still wasn't enough. Because the truth is, in this system, it's never enough. Not unless the system changes. And that's what this moment is now about. Not just one player. Not just one coach. Not even just one media market. It's about whether the league will finally create a system where development isn't subject to bias, where media access isn't a license to destroy someone's reputation, where coaches are held accountable not only for wins, but for how they manage and develop all their players, especially the ones who are easy targets. That means real consequences, not just for Stefanski, but for the environment that allowed this to happen without question. That means reevaluating how practice reps are distributed. That means documenting how and why certain players are placed on scout teams. That means ensuring media coverage isn't reinforcing stereotypes that the league claims to be dismantling. And it means something else too, listening to the fans. Because one of the most overlooked parts of this story is how the fans refuse to play along. They didn't accept the media narrative. They didn't parrot the talking points. They pushed back. They watched the film. They questioned why a player with SHEDEUR's profile wasn't being developed. They made noise, and the league noticed. That growing gap between media framing and fan perception, it's becoming harder to ignore. Fans are doing their own homework. They're challenging reporters. They're analyzing plays. They're turning their frustration into action. And that pressure is changing the power dynamic. For years, the media could paint a picture and fans would follow. Now, fans want the raw footage. They want the context. They want the truth. And they're not afraid to call out the disconnect when they see it. That's part why this blew up. Not because SHEDEUR failed spectacularly, but because fans realized he was never actually allowed to succeed. So now, the ball is in the NFL's court. Does it double down on the old ways, protect its insiders, and wait for the noise to die down? Or does it finally build something better, something fairer, Something that doesn't let bias masquerade as coaching strategy or tough love analysis. Because this moment has to mean something. Otherwise, what's the point? If there's no policy shift, if there's no clear accountability, if Stefanski stays and the media keeps its access, and SHEDEUR quietly fades in the background, then it sends a message louder than any press conference ever could, that nothing's changed. But if this is the start of a new standard, if this is where development gets tracked, media conduct gets reevaluated, and every team is forced to show how it supports its players, then SHEDEUR's struggle wasn't for nothing. Then this is the crack in the armor that leads to real, lasting change. So keep your eyes open. Watch what happens next. Not just with SHEDEUR, but with the next rookie QB who enters the league with expectations and gets handed obstacles instead of opportunity. Watch how the league handles coaches who don't invest in talent equitably. Watch who's allowed to keep writing the stories and who finally gets challenged. Because this is a league that thrives on narrative. And the only way to change the outcome is to change who's telling the story. And if you think this is just about one coach making a bad call or a few journalists going too far, think again. What happened to SHEDEUR Sanders is the blueprint, a familiar one, recycled for decades in the NFL. A black quarterback with talent walks into the league, and before he ever throws a meaningful pass, the script's already written for him. Too flashy, too confident, not mature enough, not a system fit. The same tired lines, over and over. SHEDEUR came in with a college resume, with a legacy that brought attention but also expectations. And despite all that, despite the promise, the tape, the work ethic, the league's response was immediate and chilling. Sideline him, mute him, box him out. And let's not overlook the most dangerous part of what Stefanski did. He didn't just deny SHEDEUR practice reps. He put him on the scout team and left him there. For a quarterback, that's where momentum dies. No game speed experience with the real offense. No chemistry with the starters. No live reps to make mistakes, learn, and adjust. Just a role where he pretends to be the other team's QB every week. That's not development. That's containment. And the damage goes beyond the field. Because while Stefanski was busy making SHEDEUR invisible in the locker room, the media made sure to keep him visible for all the wrong reasons. Every small issue, blown up. A sore ankle, mocked. A traffic ticket, turned into a conversation about discipline. A missed media session, suddenly a headline about maturity. None of it based on performance. All of it designed to frame him as something he wasn't. Because when you don't have gameplay to criticize, you pivot to character. And that's exactly what these journalists did. And here's the part people don't want to say out loud. When a black quarterback, those attacks hit differently. Because there's history there. A long history of framing black QBs as athletes, not thinkers, raw talent, not leaders. Those narratives don't come from nowhere. They're recycled stereotypes dressed in modern sports jargon. So when the coverage around SHEDEUR didn't focus on football, it wasn't just lazy. It was deliberate. It was a signal. The same one the coaching staff was sending. We don't see him as a real contender. But the fans did. That's what flipped the story. Not the media. Not the team. The fans. They saw through it. They started asking questions. Why isn't SHEDEUR getting reps? Why is the media ignoring what's happening on the field, or lack of it? Why are non-football details being turned into full-blown narratives? People started digging, looking at how similar quarterbacks were treated, comparing development timelines, watching film, and what they found wasn't a young player failing to develop. It was a young player being denied development altogether. And that growing pressure is what forced the league's hand. Enter Roger Goodell. For years, the NFL commissioner has played it safe when it comes to team operations. Say a few neutral words, let teams sort out. But this time, he didn't stay quiet. He named the issue. He identified the individuals. And he made it clear that this wasn't just a matter of bad optics. It was a failure of leadership, coaching, and journalistic ethics. He did what the league rarely does. Acknowledge systemic bias, not just in theory, but in specific action. And when he threatened to remove Stefanski, that wasn't just a statement. That was the league's top authorities saying, we're not ignoring this anymore. That's a big deal. Because now, every coach knows Your developmental decisions are being watched. Your practice rotations aren't private anymore. If you claim a player isn't ready, you better be able to prove you try to get him ready. And if you keep a quarterback like SHEDEUR on the scout team while letting less talented players run with the starters, there will be consequences. And let's be honest, there should be, because what's the point of scouting talent, drafting it, and signing it if you're going to bury it the second it arrives? Development has to be intentional, transparent, equitable. That's what this moment demands. Same goes for the media. If you're credentialed, if you're given access to the players, if you're shaping the public narrative, you need to be held to standard too. When the focus of your reporting is character-based insinuation with no factual basis in play, that's not critique. That's sabotage. And when those reports only seem to surface when the player in question is black, that's not coincidence. That's bias with a microphone. The old excuse, we're just doing our job, doesn't hold up anymore. Because the job of sports journalism is to inform, not inflame. If you're targeting a player with personal attacks disguised as analysis, you're not informing anyone. You're creating a narrative, one that has real-world impact. Impact on how teams see that player, on how fans treat that player, on how sponsors and opportunities find or avoid that player. And that's why Goodell's response matters so much. It wasn't about saving face. It was about saving the integrity of the league, about drawing a line in the sand and saying, development isn't optional, equity isn't a buzzword, and media access comes with accountability. But here's the catch. None of this matters if nothing changes. If Stefanski stays, if SHEDEUR keeps getting boxed out, if those journalists keep their seats and their platforms with zero consequence, if the league doesn't back up Goodell's statement with real policy, then this will all just become another controversy that fades away, another moment we talk about for a week, then move on while the system resets and waits for the next young talent to chew up. But if this sparks change, if teams are now required to track development practices, if media access is reevaluated, if the next black quarterback is given reps before he's written off, then SHEDEUR's story might just be the one that changes the script. Because that's what this is. A script written by teams, edited by the media, sold to the public. And this time, people didn't buy it. That matters. Because when fans push back, when leadership steps up, and when players like SHEDEUR refuse to break under pressure, that's how the narrative changes. That's how accountability becomes real. That's how equity stops being a tagline and starts being enforced. So don't let this moment fade. Stay loud. Stay critical. Keep watching. Keep asking why. Don't just settle for a press conference. Look for the policy. Look for the shift. Look for the changes that prove the league is serious. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let us know how you think the NFL should respond. Because this isn't just about one player, one coach, or one team. This is about the future of the league. Hit that like button if you're done with performative accountability. Share this with someone who still believes development is just about talent. And subscribe. We're not letting the story stop here. Because if talent doesn't get a fair shot, what are we even watching?